Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Johanna Leasiolagi, a senior technical advisor for the Defense Intelligence Agency. Jojo, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we know DIA has a lot going on when it comes to technology refresh, technology modernization. I'm wondering, what are you focused on when it comes to tech at DIA these days?
Right. This year, we're really focusing on delivering the future architecture of JWICS. And we are really working on expanding the highway that will deliver a higher capacity and bandwidth to our customers as we enter the cloud modernization as well, and the delivery of JWCC and the C2E contract. So from both sides, in the IC and the DOD customers-wise, we're really looking to being able to deliver higher throughput and better services to our community as a whole.
Got it. And JWICS is the Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communication System, the top secret network really for the entire federal government. And it's about a 3-decade-old network that's in need of a tech refresh, and it's now moving into the cloud and things like that. So it sounds like a pretty dynamic time. What role does the cloud play in the future of JWICS?
Oh, that's a great question. So JWICS, if we think about it as a highway, and just like AT&T and Verizon, right, we expanded our capacity on how we support our customer base. And so as we start investing in better technology, machine learning, tactical communications, and we start trying to integrate how the battle space commanders work together with the intelligence community, they need applications that take higher bandwidth, right? And that they are integrated across the board. So no longer do we need to have systems that are stovepiped and they can't work together. And so what the cloud systems allow us to do is to be able to have an area where we can move into more smart location and move those applications that can work faster and better without having to really worry about having so many different data centers and having to spend so much resources on aging architecture and maintaining infrastructure that really ages really fast. So it kind of really helps us being able to integrate our systems together and work smartly.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the intelligence community has been dabbling with the cloud, or maybe a bit more for a while now. There was the C2S contract, and now you mentioned the C2E contract that was awarded a few years ago. What do you think the intelligence community and all of its security requirements, what have you learned so far about using the cloud over the last decade, and how does that, I guess, propel you into the future?
It's a partnership. The risk doesn't necessarily just transfer, and we can't necessarily just ignore the risk. We just saw this last week with the leak of some of the email services, right? So just because we're moving to the cloud does not mean that we no longer have a risk and that it's on the cloud service providers. It's a partnership here where they also have a part of infrastructure that they have to secure, and we also as customers have our responsibilities to secure. And so if we continue to work together and having a better visibility into what each other does in the community, then it kind of strengthens the entire system architecture. So I think that one of our biggest lessons learned is to ensure that we have a strategy that encompasses an end-to-end security rather than just having to worry about transferring the security and not worrying about it.
Got it. Yeah, they're still managing your data, and there's, I guess, clear expectations that have to be set up front about who's responsible for what.
Yes.
Yeah. And you also mentioned the JWCC contract and how DOD just finalized that last year. You've got, I guess, more of an array of cloud services now available to you from a contractual perspective. So what's kind of the path forward now that you have both C2E and JWCC in place for taking advantage of those this year?
So we have been working together with the programs offices to find efficiencies where it makes sense for us to peer as service providers and ensure that we have those locations, kind of like a co-location of sorts, where customers can have better access to all of the different services that will be available. That way it's not confusing on having one service over here and another one over there. So we've been really working together on understanding where in our locations, where do we peer, how do we structure those peerings, and which cloud service provider is going to be and where. And that's been kind of like a partnership, especially because we've been looking into how do we provide that data closer to the edge, and how do we ensure that the architecture is postured for that efficiency.
And yeah, I mean, you're talking about how JWIX is really a global network with nodes all over the place, right? So you need to really architect it in a way that makes sense?
Yes, correct. It wouldn't make sense to have a location where we would peer at one site and then it causes latency in another continent, right? So it's really important for us to strategize on where we peer, where do we put those services, and as well as if we need something closer to the customers, if it's either a regional center that's a little smaller, or if it's something more tactical, that we really work on how that infrastructure is going to kind of work together.
And ultimately it comes down to setting up these cloud access points, right? And that's how you kind of connect the highway of JWIX to the cloud. Is that
That's
the
correct.
way to looking at it?
Yes,
Okay.
we're paving the infrastructure, you know, the baseline, and then the other services will overlay on top of that.
Got it. Okay, that's interesting. I mean, and let's talk about the future of JWIX a little bit, some of the requirements, something I know you've been focused on. What are some of those requirements for mission owners? What do those look like coming down the pipeline?
Right. So we have varying types of mission customers. Some of our mission customers require the ability to move large amount of data back and forth. And so from that perspective, we are looking into upgrading the capacity of those circuits to make sure that those pipes are large enough to transfer that a large amount of data. For some of our customers, it requires lower latency. And so from that perspective, we look at the location of where we peer and where we have those data centers. So if one big Amazon service is in location and they need something smaller, then we put a smaller regional center closer to them. That might be one of the solutions. Or if our customers require tactical systems to respond to things like world events where they need to deploy quickly overnight, we may have a kit that is tactical and deploy it with them that has like a smaller site that enables them to have some kind of connectivity that lowers that latency and has access to that data. So we're seeing a lot of varying use cases that we are having to work with industry to understand how do we address specific scenarios.
Interesting. So like quickly responding to a contingency or a situation like Ukraine, right? Like
Correct.
That's probably a good example.
Yes.
You know, what goes into that to the extent that you can describe it here, just scaling up something like that, you know, and what technologies, I guess, enable something like that. I imagine you need to take advantage of, you know, maybe satellite internet sometimes and things like that.
Yeah, we try to take a look at the use case of what might be needed and try to figure out what may be out there already without having to reinvent the wheel, because it takes a long time to design something. So one of the biggest things that has aided us is partnering with industry and trying to understand what they have done in their scenarios. If you take a look at some of the telecommunication systems to address some of the issues from a latency perspective with, you know, cell phones, for example, right? If you want to take a look at Netflix or one of your TVs in there, right? So what they have done is they have partnered with cloud service providers to have a smaller kit closer to those towers right, for the cell phone towers, and then it moves the data closer to that area, so that way you can stream the data faster. So if we need to deploy faster, we look at some of those areas and kind of partner with industries to see what we can learn from them from that perspective.
And when you hear about, increased mobility in the future of JWICs, that's kind of what you're talking about, right? Not being fixed to a large site necessarily, right, but being able to spread out a little bit more and access the network.
Correct, especially if you look at the objectives of JADC2, being able to integrate from anywhere, including the deployed personnel that we have. They don't have access to our TSSCI connectivity most of the time. And so we need to be able to communicate with them anywhere in the world. So we need to be able to support those tactical systems, whether it's a cell phone or a ship or an airplane, and whatever they need in those circumstances.
And is that something that you're already doing today, or are you piloting it this year? Where does that kind of stand?
We're in different phases.
Okay.
Today we have some level of solutions that we're able to help our community at various locations due to our necessities, right? So our high demand and the volatility of the world has demanded that we act fast. So it may not be like a mature solution. It may be something that we had to do because we had to respond to something. But we are working on different phases of maturing different solutions. And that will help us down the road to be able to integrate together.
Got it. And then I know something that you've already alluded to and we talked about is the cybersecurity requirements. You mentioned the report of, a Special Operations Command had a misconfigured cloud server at some point that was leaving some data, unclassified data, but still sensitive data exposed to the internet. So how important is security as you make this shift to the cloud, to increased mobility, where you have more widely available network services? What's the role of security, and how are you getting after that at your kind of global network?
Yes, that is actually something that we're exploring right now. USDINS and ODNI have established a joint team that's kind of looking into the security of the mobility systems, so we can address things. It goes beyond just a technical area, but it also goes into governance and policies. As you know, tactical systems, they have to be mobile, so it has to be able to work anywhere in the world. And today, if you look at data governance, right, it could mean that if you are in a certain area of a country, the laws in there locally mandate that data can be, reviewed by either the local government or someone else, right? And so data privacy laws across the world are very different. So one of the biggest challenges is understanding the policies and the laws that regulate the data at that location, the visibility, the security, and how do we protect it? How do we make sure that that is our data and that no one else is going to look at it, and that whenever we need it, we can get it back? So those are different challenges, not just a technical, but also a policy.
Yeah, that seems like a tough challenge, a tough nut to crack. What's the path forward? You're looking at this year, you have this joint team looking at it. What do you think the path forward is to, I guess, just kind of moving forward with that? Is it policy solutions? Is it technology solutions? Or is it a mix?
Right. It's both.
Okay.
We not only do we have to establish maybe a memorandum of understanding or some kind of agreement between us, right? But we also have to take a look at the data sovereignty, the security of that system, to make sure that we are protecting the data at rest. So whatever is staying there in storage, and that we are also protecting it in transit. So if we are using satellite communications, to make sure that data is encrypted correctly and that is not leaking, right? And the equipment there as well that's storing the data, that is also secured as well.
Interesting. Yeah, that'll be an interesting thing to follow. And then I think something you mentioned at the DODIS conference just last year that we talked about a little bit when I was out there in San Antonio with you was the ability to have an automated JWICS network that can self-heal. Can you talk a little bit about what that means in practice?
Yes, so automation is really big right now, especially because systems are so complex that any kind of manual intervention can create an error and cause long outages, right? And so having a system that is smart enough to configure itself and also identify when there's an outage and fix itself is really important. So today we are able to demonstrate how we are able to establish a new node and bring it up within a matter of minutes. And that's kind of like the idea that we would like, you know, how you go into your internet service provider, you request that your internet, your service, it gets delivered, and then it just kind of works. We would like to make sure that those are things that we're looking into, so that way we provide a better service. And not only that, but the service, the system is smart enough to heal itself and protect itself. So if it sees some kind of behavioral anomaly or any kind of security issues, it can kind of react accordingly and kind of secure that area.
And I imagine you have to put some, I guess, redundancy in place. So if one element of a network goes down, it can immediately, you know, fix that and kind of replace it with another sort of piece of the highway.
Right, definitely. That resiliency is really important, making sure that we have redundant path, redundant connectivity, and that the system is strong enough to protect itself and maintain operations, even if there's like 1 or 2 outages, right?
Got it. And I mean, this is all happening to a network that, as I mentioned at the top, is about 3 decades old. So it's kind of in this place where it's you're refreshing the tech while also trying to modernize and look to the future. How are you trying to strike that balance where you're just trying to get to a better place today while also setting yourselves up for success, you know, more than just a few years down the line, but a couple decades down the line?
Yes, it's very challenging. Our old director, General Ashley, said to us when we first established JWICS modernization that he wanted us to be very uncomfortable and go at a speed that make sure that we addressed all of these issues, right? And we have been very uncomfortable, but we have been making great strides to get there. So we're working very carefully, balancing that risk of making sure that we are tech refreshing the architecture, but at the same time, making sure that we're not causing outages to our users. So yeah, we're moving fast.
Right, because I mean, it's not just knocking down someone's internet service when they're streaming Netflix. It's right. Pretty important in terms of how DIA is using network across the globe. Great, got it. And you know, I wanted to ask about the path forward for using more cloud computing technologies and applications on the high side, on the classified side. What's the path forward there for DIA?
Right. So today we are having a couple of strategies to get us there. We actually have a program today called MARS, which is a machine-assisted analytics program that we have. And they are already really ahead of the game. They're really working on moving some of our Intel data into a application that can integrate all of these different kind of stovepipe environments that gathers intelligence, and it can deliver intelligence to our combatant commands. And so that is kind of already helping us out with how we are moving there. They are leading the way, and they actually have really good system analytics solutions that we're learning from them as well. And so our applications developers, they are really working together with them to learn those systems and also integrate them into other applications that are kind of legacy. And so that's kind of what's helping us get there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that plays into JADC2, Joint All-Domain Command and Control. You know, what are some of the requirements that DIA is specifically focused on with JADC2, which is, of course, a kind of cloud-enabled concept?
Yes, so JADC2 is a really big effort to integrate all these different services. The Air Force, the Army, they have some efforts already, And so what we want to do is be able to integrate the data that the tactical personnel gather from NIPRNet, SIPRNet to JWIX, make sure that all of these systems that we have are no stovepipe and that they work together. And so we're moving data back and forth to deliver either Intel app or data to our tactical operators on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, what goes into that? Because that seems like such a new construct. NIPR and SIPR are right traditionally like completely separate by design, by almost regulation. So how do you get to that kind of concept?
Yeah. It's a huge effort, right? You know, it's still starting. It just started a couple of years ago, the concept, and we're still even working through a lot of the designs today. And so what that means for us is that we realize that our tactical systems, our military troops, you know, they don't have access to TSSCI systems. So we need to be able to communicate to them on the ground. And so how do we send them data faster, right? How do we allow them and enable them to have that data faster? And so we need to have a way for these systems to integrate, and the security that's around it is some of the things that we're looking into. How do we protect the data as it goes up and down? How do we make sure that the data is stripped? How is it tagged? And that all goes into zero trust, right? Data tagging and making sure that you have access to the right data. And so those are really interesting areas that we're really researching, but I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. So it's kind of in the research phase, and it's not quite into maybe the piloting phase yet, is that fair to say?
It's still something that it's evolving, yes.
Do you think that there will be any sort of, you know, projects or anything like that to push the ball forward that are particularly important that folks should know about in the coming, you know, year or two?
Right. I believe USDINS and ODNI had a small group a couple of weeks ago where they were discussing how they would like to move forward. They're still coming up with a strategy on that way forward, but I'm still kind of waiting to hear back from them what the next step is going to be.
Interesting. Yeah, that'll be great to watch as we move forward here. And I mean, you can kind of get into a conversation about, you know, classification policies, and there's just a lot going on there. But obviously, we're talking about cloud technologies and extending cloud services to the edge. Really, you talked about getting data to the operators on the edge who don't have access to highly classified systems to these rooms where you can access that top secret SCI network. So you need to find a way to get them the data they need. How are you extending the cloud services to the edge? We've talked about that a little bit with kind of the mobility requirements. Is there anything else that we should know about just getting the cloud out to the edge, wherever that might be in the world?
Right. Well, the systems that we have today are we use different services, right? And so our deployable communications kits, one of them is called Falcon, and that enables us to be able to leverage alternate means of communication so that we can provide services to the tactical teams from anywhere in the world. And so what we're trying to do with those systems is to ensure that they grow from there. And that goes back to something that we talked about earlier, maturing the system and adding more services on in a kind of thoughtful manner, where we're able to work out the issues with data sovereignty and then store data and ensure that people have access even if they were disconnected. So those are things that it's evolving, but right now we are still in the beginning phases on those efforts.
Interesting. And so the Falcon deployable, it's a deployable comms kit that you've had in place now for how long?
We've had it actually for a year now.
Okay.
And it's working pretty well.
Okay. And is there a plan to maybe expand that, or is it pretty limited at this point?
Yes, it's pretty limited at this point. And we are working on expanding it this year. So we're starting to work on the engineering and testing of those additional capabilities. But we're also working together with the services, and we've never done that before. We have monthly engagements with the engineers across the services to understand their requirements and what they have from tactical kits, because we realize that each one of them has their own solution. And so to ensure that we have one platform that can integrate, those are some of the things we're looking into. As an example, let's say that Air Force has their own tactical kit to move the data closest to the edge. They may have an Amazon outpost, and the Army may have decided to use a Dell server as an example. And while the Amazon outpost is great and the Dell are both great, the systems may not be interchangeable. So what could end up happening is that they may need access to some kind of data we may have on the cloud, but the data can't move closer to the edge because it doesn't work with that system. And so we're trying to establish an architecture that can work across all of the systems, regardless of which service provider you have or which equipment you have. And so those are some of the foundations that we're developing right now.
Breaking down those stovepipes that
Yes.
you mentioned earlier. What else are you talking about with the military services? Is that the main focus of these engineering meetings, or are there other requirements and ideas that are coming up?
We actually talk about a lot of things. In December, we talked about the automation. We went through that. This January, we spoke about the tactical communications. And next month, we're speaking about visibility and how do we integrate our visibility into our systems. So that way we work better together when there's outages, especially when it comes to cloud service providers and our systems. Right now, the cloud service providers may be looking at one of their systems as an outage, and we may have a different system and we don't know where the outage is, right? So we want to make sure that we're working together to understand visibility end to end from the WAN to the LAN. And if there is any outage or security issue, we work together to address the issue soonest. And so we need systems that can integrate from there.
Got it. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It sounds like you're moving kind of from this construct where it was kind of pushing technology to the components a lot to now a little bit more of a collaborative relationship.
Yes, I'm very proud of that. We've been working together on and making sure that we're staying in sync with each other.
Got it. Interesting. I mean, and you alluded to or you talked about the Mars project and how that's a pretty big deal for DIA from a machine learning perspective. Cloud is obviously kind of a prerequisite, having that in place to doing big data analysis, machine learning, things like that. How else do you see this shift to sort of sort of forming the adoption of cloud services, of machine learning services on top of the cloud playing out? What needs to happen there going forward?
Oh man, there are so many opportunities for us to grow from here. The cloud service providers have a lot of services right now that, especially on the unclassified side, that we don't have on the high side, which would really help us with our missions. And so having that analytics will really help us with our visibility, with sharing information. I mean, take a look at how our world changed with being able to use Teams once we were having to do telework. Our entire way of how we collaborated changed. Before, we used to send each other emails on the high side, and it would take forever to get each other response and collaborate, right, and get us on the same page. When we had to telework and we used Teams, we were just in group text messages helping each other, right? And so the possibilities in there, it's something that, we really, I'm just really excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember your CIO, Doug Costa, talked about how you just didn't have integrated email and chat across the intelligence community until a few years ago, which is obviously seems, crazy from the outside perspective, but shows you how difficult it is, I guess, working in that environment. But you can make change if you have kind of the will and the ability to get there. Are there any other you think important applications that are, in the cloud or moving to the cloud today that you can talk about here that you think are particularly noteworthy?
Hmm. Well, we do have a couple of applications that we're looking into. We are looking into the desktop of the future and what that looks like.
Right.
Our current desktop of the future is it's actually meant to service our entire co-environment, right? Which is it services the commands and the military services, right? And so it's in need of an upgrade of what is next. So we're looking into that, and AVD may be something that we could look into, and so Active Directory may be something that we could integrate and federate with identity, right, in the future as well. And the way that we do conferencing today, each one of our agencies has their own different conferencing system, right, and it may not necessarily work together. So taking a look at the future of conferencing and how do we provide those services is also another thing that possibly could go there.
Got it. What do you need to work out to kind of get there? Is it mostly the security around these applications?
Yes, the security and how it works across the agencies. Identity is a big thing, right? And so we use different identity systems. So we would have to take a look at how do we federate, how do we integrate together, how do we make sure that we protect each other's identities, and then from there, how do these systems build on each other?
Got it. And I mean, that gets you into a conversation about zero trust a little bit. And, is that something that you're focused on from the DIA side, is kind of, cloud and zero trust and kind of getting to those sort of newer constructs around security?
Yes. Zero trust is definitely on our roadmap. However, I want to clarify something for us, right? Zero trust is not necessarily a product that we can just buy. It's definitely a strategy and not something that you can just adopt like a framework, right? So we have to tailor it. So for example, for JWIC's modernization, we looked at the zero trust elements, and then we applied which ones work for a service provider architecture. And then we identify which ones work for a customer, and then which ones work for a cloud service provider. And so that together is entirely what makes a zero trust system, right? Not necessarily JWIC's just being zero trust will protect everything. And I think it's an end-to-end system and an environment that together is how it's going to get us there.
Got it. And I mean, the Defense Department now has kind of articulated its big zero trust strategy, getting to some sort of baseline level of zero trust across many different areas by, I think, fiscal 2027. Is that generally what DIA is looking at? Where are you in that kind of journey?
We are actually beginning to implement some of the elements of zero trust this year.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm excited about that.
Yeah. Is there anything that you can preview for us?
So there's 3 elements that we are looking into. The data tagging is big, so we are standardizing the way that we do configuration management, how we identify data and how we tag data and who has access to that. We're also looking into the identity of our users and our privileged users and how we track those users, how we audit them, right, and how they have access to that data. And then thirdly, we're also making sure that the data is stored and that we track who has access to that data and where it gets stored.
Interesting. So the pretty foundational tenets to a zero trust concept. That's fascinating. Yeah, in the time we have left, I wanted to ask you about another aspect of this conversation that we can't really ignore: workforce. Both internal, and then I know you have a pretty big contractor workforce, I'm sure, at DIA that's sort of operating a lot of these technologies. What do you need there in terms of skills, qualifications? What does the future workforce look like that's operating these new technologies?
Yeah, our workforce requirements are shifting a lot, especially because technology is changing so much. So we're really looking into people who have an understanding of data science, data analysis, people who understand DevSecOps, right, as well. How do you develop and secure applications? How do you deliver applications? cloud environments, how do they protect cloud environments, and how do you create them, right? Containerization. And since we're talking about data moving closer to the edge and back and forth and standardization, so virtualization, right? A standard virtualization architecture that can support systems, right, that can be multi-cloud. Those are like some of the biggest shifts that we're seeing in the industry. Automation as well, right, and the self-healing of systems, not just networks, but the entire system, right? So those are big things where in the past we were looking at different kind of skills. These skills are shifting highly today, and so I think that so those are some of the biggest areas that I'm seeing that technology kind of grow.
I mean, back to the security conversation earlier, just being able to configure a cloud server properly day in and day out is probably pretty important there as well.
Right, yes.
And so, I mean, as a technically focused person yourself, what do you think is important in terms of, I guess, attracting new talent and retaining the talent in the IC from a technical perspective moving forward?
And Mr. Costa is really focused on that. It's actually his #1 priority. And what we're doing is mentoring our younger engineers from the moment they get to our agency. And we track them through an entire 1 year. They have a sponsor. We give them training, and we kind of take a look at what interests them. So one of the biggest things is if you're not interested in your job, then you're not really going to do well. So we try to hone those skills of what they're interested in and try to grow them in that area, but also have a mentor that really looks out for them and guides them.
Got it. I mean, do you see kind of the shifts in the broader, workforce? We've seen a lot of technology companies lay off a lot of people over the last several months. Do you see that as kind of an opportunity for an agency like DIA to reach out to some of those folks? And if so, how might you be doing that?
Yes, we have a couple of different programs. We actually take a look at people from high school age right now, and we outreach to them as well. We visit universities as well to do outreach. And then from a people perspective who may already be out in the industry, we have job fairs where we just kind of welcome anyone who wants to join the agency, and we welcome their resumes, and we start to take a look at them and match them with our openings.
Interesting. So there's a few different pathways to get in there. And,
yes.
I mean, so we've talked a lot today about a lot of different things, from JWCC to JWICS to pick your acronym, C2S, but it's all about cloud and adopting newer technologies and applications. What do you think is important for folks to be aware of when it comes to what DIA is working on here over the next year or so, from a requirements perspective or just in general? What do you kind of want to leave as a message for people?
DIA is really focused on how do we deliver better services to our customers, right? And our biggest priorities are taking a look at how do we deliver cloud services, our tactical communications, right? And we have actually kind of a capability delivery pipeline where we're starting to do rigorous DevSecOps processes and being able to better deliver applications. So what we need help from industry is to be able to understand what products and capabilities they may have that could better offer and meet our requirements, whether it is an application that can integrate things and provide higher visibility end-to-end, an application that might be able to help us with data sovereignty, in products that may be able to help us with delivering better capabilities. Even applications that help us with our cybersecurity systems, right? There are so many different areas in cybersecurity that are still unexplored, and those are things that we really welcome industry to kind of help us with.
You mentioned the DevSecOps process. Is that something you have in place already? How can folks kind of get linked up into that?
Yes, we do have a process in place that we're maturing. And what we do with our industry partners that are interested is we have a communications team that they reach out to. They send emails to them, and then our senior leaderships meets with them. I believe it's like once a month or once a quarter on a Friday, and then we kind of listen to their products and kind of figure out where they may fit into our architecture. So that's kind of what helps us stay engaged with them and learn what may be out there.
And are there any, I mean, you mentioned some of the technologies that you might be interested in. Are there any technology trends that just in general you're watching from DIA that's particularly of interest to you?
I am currently watching how quantum communications is working.
Oh, really? Okay.
In-Q-Tel came up with this like quantum architecture that they kind of helped me understand a little bit. So there was like the quantum application and the quantum computing area. And so I'm kind of looking at the quantum communications area, which is kind of like where, a system like JWICS would kind of apply to. And so taking a look at how we're evolving from there, that's something I'm keeping my eye on.
Interesting. That seems pretty important to an agency like DIA. We know, I think, in general, quantum computer might be several decades far off from here. Mm-hmm. Is quantum communications, I don't know, is that on the same timeline, but it's still something that you think is important to track, or where does that go?
It may be really far off, but the important part here is the strategy on how we leave a legacy of JWICS modernization. We started with a system that is old and outdated, and what we want to leave behind as a legacy is something that keeps going even after we leave, right? And so it doesn't stop optimizing the system, doesn't stop just here with JWICS modernization being delivered. So after we finish this iteration of JWICS, then the next one is going to come. What is next? What's the next capability? What are our customers really needing? And so I, as the chief architect, needs to make sure that I'm keeping an eye on those technologies so that when it gets here, I'm not caught off guard. And so those are some of the things that are important to me to leave a legacy of, a system that can stay up to date.
Sure. I mean, not just keeping an eye on the near term, right, which is important, but the very far term at the same time. And then, of course, the other side of the quantum conversation is quantum encryption and the security of data today, how that could be decrypted in the future. Is that something that you're worried about at all as a future architect?
The NSM-10 just came out, right? NSA's, saying that encryption, it may not be as secure, and how do we address certain things on a quantum communications area, right? So taking a look at how do we protect the system 5 years down the road is really important for us, and how do we do that is something that we're really working closely with NSA on how do we want to address those risks.
Got it. Interesting. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. But again, I'd like to thank today's guest, Johanna Leasiolagi, a Senior Technical Advisor for the Defense Intelligence Agency. Jojo, thanks so much for spending time with us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm your moderator, Justin Doubleday, and you're listening to Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the DOD Cloud Exchange.